Hello Matt 1, this is Mr. Pratt here to review with you how you're going to create your handles for your butcher block project. So this is an example of a butcher block that has handles on the bottom side, and you can see this notch here. This is what we call a handle for this project. And so we're going to be using a router table to create this, but first we have to talk about how we're going to lay this out. So we know that this handle will be in the center of our butcher block project. So let me get first some supplies here. You're going to need a combination square, a pencil, and a tape measure. And so this will help you in laying out where the lines need to be for your handles. I have an example board here that we looked at earlier, and we used this for the portable router. You can see that round over edge that we created from using the portable router. And again, that's just going to knock off the sharp corners there. And this is done for both the top and the bottom side. Now we're going to say this is the bottom since it's easier to see. We are actually going to be marking the lines on the side here, but the lines will then get transferred to the end of our board later on. So to begin, we need to know what is the width of our board here. And so we want to know how wide this is. If I take my tape measure, I can tell that this is 8 inches, and this is what your butcher block project should be as far as the width is concerned. But I know some of you might have a board that's just a tad under, and so you want to make sure that you know the actual width of your board, and what we're then going to do is find where the center is. So half of 8 inches is going to give me 4 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and take my tape measure. And I'm going to mark this at 4 inches using my pencil. And what we're then going to do is determine how long do we want our handle to be based on where our center point is. And to get this measurement, a good rule of thumb is take your hand, take your tape measure, and measure how wide is it. In this case, I have about 3 inches. And so that's plenty as far as the amount of fingers I can get into the handle. And so I'm going to measure from the center point that I just marked 1.5 inches both directions so that I have the length of my handle centered in the width of my board. So from my line, I'm going to go ahead and mark 1.5 inches, so I'm at 2.5 currently. An inch would give me 1.5, and an extra 1/2 inch there would be at 1. And to make this easier, I'm going to move the tape measure, started at 3. I measure over 1.5 inches to the right, and then we're going to take our square, and you don't have to draw a line at the center, but we want to draw our lines for the exterior edges of our handle. And you would do the same thing for this side on the other end as well. Now, once you have those lines, we're going to transfer those to the end of our board. And this is what's going to help us to set up the router. An example of this is on this board here, where I have the start of my handle already done, so you can see. All right, here's my starting point and my stopping point. And the deeper we go into the board, the longer the handle is going to be. So we reach that desired profile at the end. We want to make sure that when we are creating our handles, that we can actually fit our hand underneath the board and that it's not too tight. And so that's what we'll look at with the router table here in a little bit. Hopefully this demonstration helps you in understanding the layout of where your handle is going to go and what tools you are going to need in order to create that. If you have any questions, feel free to ask as you are working in the shop, and I'll be happy to help.
Welcome back to the shop virtually. We are going to look at the router table today, which is a little bit different than the portable router that you used, that we looked at yesterday. And in this demonstration, you're going to learn how to create the handles for the bottom side of your butcher block project so your hands can fit into your board to lift it up off a table or other flat surface. In a previous demonstration, we looked at how to lay out for the handle itself and the length of it, making sure that it's centered on the width of our board, and then drawing those layout lines using a tape measure, square, and a pencil. So this is something that's going to have to happen on both ends of your project before we can begin setting up the router table, which we're going to look at here. To begin, I want to make sure that I stress the importance of reviewing your notes. So there is a document available to you on Schoology that will give you some guidance as we work through the router table. Make sure that you have this out or up on your screen, and that you're completing the notes as we go through the setup and the use of this machine. If there's something that you're confused about, just simply ask when you go to use the machine, or ask before you use the machine, and that way we can work through that and review it together. Of course, you never want to operate the router table without me present, and so that's the first thing that you want to make sure that I have given you permission before you begin using the machine. Just like with the portable router, we want to make sure that we remove any jewelry, that we can find long hair, and eliminate any loose clothing. It's important that we always have proper eye protection. Again, make sure you push your glasses up so that way sawdust doesn't get underneath your glasses, your lens. And then of course, we're going to go through the parts of the router, and this is where the bottom portion of the sheet comes into play. First, let's talk about the parts of the machine. We have a fence, which is located behind or in alignment with the router bit that we're going to be using. The actual router bit itself, this is called a cove bit. It's almost the opposite of what we used earlier for the radius, the round over edges. So that was a round over bit. This is a cove bit. The radius goes the opposite direction. And then we have our power switch in the back, which is a start and stop. In addition to those three pieces that are very important, we have something called an adjustment crank. And so the adjustment crank allows us to raise and lower the router bit using the dial located in the front of the table. If we turn it counterclockwise, that's going to lower the router bit. If we turn it clockwise, that's going to raise the router bit. One of the things I'll talk about in a minute will be the dial itself and understanding how it works. The first thing we're going to do is set up our stop blocks here for the perimeter of our handle. And so we're going to take the lines located on the end of our board here, have the router bit, the widest part of the router bit, with the fence. Take the left edge of your board, line it up with the outside edge of the router bit, and we're going to adjust the right stop block. So that way, when I begin, this right edge here will be lined up with the right stop block. The same thing is going to happen with the right line and the left edge of our board. So lining that up, loosen the stop block, move it out so it's just up against the left edge. And we now have the length of our handle set up so that way when we begin, we're going to push in at the right stop block, go across, moving to the left, and stopping at the left stop block. The next thing we're going to do is begin the setup for the router bit. Just like the portable router, the router bit is securely placed in there by using a collet, and it has a bearing located at the top. Those are two things that are very important when it comes to using the portable router. The adjustment crank goes into the dial here,
in the front of the table, and we're going to turn it counterclockwise to start the bit just above the table. If we have it too high, it's going to take too much material in one pass. And so an easy way to determine if it's set up correctly is to take our board, place it on top of the router bit, and see how high does it come off the table. If it comes off more than a 1/16 of an inch, it's probably too high. Right there, it looks pretty good. We're now ready to go ahead and plug in the machine. Of course, we want to make sure that the stop button was pressed in, so nobody accidentally pressed that in. We're going to plug in the machine. On here is a kill switch for the router table. There's a reset and a test button. What this means is when this is plugged in, this does not allow power to the machine unless you hit the reset button, or it's also labeled as on. When you press that in, the light will go off. The outlet is located to the right of the router table. This is a fairly loud machine, so when I begin, you might have some difficulty hearing me, but you should be able to see exactly what's happening. I'm going to go ahead and turn the router on. When I send my board through, I want to keep my hands back away from the cutter, but securing my board so it's flat on the table. I'm going to push in, go across to the left side, and pull it back out, and turn it around, and do the exact same thing on the other end. This happens on both ends before we make any adjustments to the height of the router bit. Here I started my handle on both ends. It's not exactly to the length of my board yet, but we're going to get there over time. After the first pass, we're going to take the adjustment crank and we're going to turn this so that the 0 at the front of the dial has been passed the first time, and at the second time we're going to stop. So you're spinning the dial 2 full rotations. Make sure that the same side is facing down that you just routed. Turn it back on and begin the same operation. You might see a little bit of burning here. That's okay, that's just friction created. We'll be able to sand that out. As you continue to use the router table, you want to check to make sure your hands fit in there. Like I said, this is going to take multiple passes. The good thing about this is the fact that everyone has fairly much the same size board. We can have multiple students do this at once.
As you can see, this is a fairly messy process, so you want to make sure that you're cleaning up after yourself.
At this point, I can feel that my hands can fit in here into the handle, so that means that they're good. We can go back and we'll sand this once we are done using the router table and clean up any imperfections that are left there, like the burn marks. So hopefully this video helps you as you begin working on your butcher block project and creating the handles for this project.